All right. The last story we have for today comes from Security Week, and the title here is AI Giving Rise to the Zero Knowledge Threat Actor.
Not to be confused with zero knowledge coworker, which we've had for a while.
We've all, we've all had one of those. So the story here is uh, it's a packaging up of yet another jailbreak of a large language model. So for those of you who may not be steeped in this, right, most large language models have some kind of guardrails put in place. Like you can't ask it how to make a bomb, you can't ask it how to make sarin gas, can't ask it to help you plot some kind of mass casualty attack. They do things like that. They also tend to have restrictions on creating malicious applications. And by the way, as we've talked about several times on the show now, more and more and more IT development is happening with the assistance with the assistance of LLMs. So we know that LLMs are getting to be, for better or for worse, capable, I won't call it competent, but capable of creating applications based on how they're described by, through a prompt. And so there's been for quite some time now, a bit of a cottage industry around developing these jailbreaks. So clever ways of tricking the model into violating the rules that it was given. And it's lots of different ways to do that. In this instance, the way they did it was by convincing the large language model that it was actually in a different world. Like it was no longer on Earth, it was on a different planet, and the laws in the society were entirely different. The creation of a malware was celebrated and it was not illegal. And so they kind of created this whole alternate universe, which is, by the way, not unprecedented. This has been a tactic for how people attack these models for quite some time. It's surprising to me that it still works, I guess. But what they additionally did was created different personas, and each of the personas fed different requirements and provided different bits of feedback to the model, so that as they didn't just come out of the gate and say, write me a keylogger that works on Windows and then sends the output to this address. They didn't do that. What they started off by, know, working on, create an application that records keystrokes, and then they would have another persona say, okay, now store those keystrokes in a text file, and then another persona would be, now send that file to a a remote server. I'm oversimplifying, but they decomposed the chain that is required to build a successful keylogger from beginning to end into a series of phases, where none of the phases were so obvious to the LLM that it was actually doing something that would have violated its rules. So I don't know, by the way, if they still have to do that even in this alternate world that they created. I don't really know. Um, that part's a little bit unknown to me. So maybe the guardrails in this model were pretty good, and they had to get very creative on how to bypass it. But the whole point of this story is that we've now entered a time where if you have someone who is creative enough in how they're able to interface and ask for things with these models, they can have the model create malicious malware, basically, without actually needing to know how to program. And so right now, this particular example was a keylogger, but in the scheme of things, it's somewhat benign. But it's not hard to think that if you had someone who had a lot of time on their hands, as I think a lot of out of work IT people have these days, they could come up with something that was much more destructive and nefarious. And so, again, we're entering a world where it doesn't require people to be like uber malware dev type people to perpetrate some of these more advanced attacks. And that's kind of concerning. And it's not just malware, by the way. They actually talk about later in the article how we're seeing AI being used to facilitate things like phishing attacks, making phishing attacks much more plausible, not just in like rewriting the phishing lure or what have you, but by doing research and helping to identify like who should I attack in this company to have the greatest the greatest possibility of success. And also like here is the results of an external network scan. What is the thing I should focus my attack on, and so on. So it's becoming an enabler for bad actors. It's similarly, by the way, it's not just a one-sided argument. It's also becoming an enabler uh, for security teams in different ways. Pretty much for every kind of bad thing you come up with, you can come up with a complementary good thing that people could do as well. But it's interesting that this world of computer crime is being opened to a whole set of laymen that really wasn't possible before. I will say, while that is true, I think that is true, and it's continuing to get better. I know that there's a lot of people kind of groaning at their at YouTube or their podcast player right now because AI is not super reliable. It's improving at a rate that we've not seen before. Like it is, it may suck today. It sucked worse yesterday. It's going to suck less tomorrow. It's going to suck way less in 6 months and a whole lot less in a year. This trend line is not stopping. Like this is, I want to just keep going back to it. This AI is not blockchain. It is not going away. Okay. I don't care what you read. I don't care how many people make fun of AI slop images. It is here. Companies are leveraging it. Bad actors are leveraging it. Security teams are leveraging it more and more and more every day. It
I
is
can't think
not
of
blockchain.
a single vendor that I utilize that isn't all in on AI as their talk track for everything that they're planning to implement and innovate around.
I saw a quote today. It was one of the articles I read that was as I was trying to prepare for my research, and the quote was, and I don't completely agree with it, but the quote was, "AI is not going to replace us, but people who understand AI will replace those who don't." And so I will just encourage everybody to not be too naive. Like if you're ready to move to Montana into the hills and write your manifesto, hey, fine. If you want to go into farming, awesome. But if you want to continue on in IT, consider learning a bit about AI and
Completely agreed.
how it can how it can impact your job. Anyway,
Yeah,
that's a
it's
whole
no,
separate
I
aside. Sorry.
completely agree with you. We've been in this industry a long time. We've seen a lot of change. We were in this industry before the rise of the internet, which probably tells you how old we are. This is happening faster and more aggressively than any other change I've seen when it comes to impact on IT and security.
Yes. So they have a couple of recommendations, and honestly, I think they're somewhat context specific. So, for example, they recommend improving employee awareness about the threats associated with AI. And so, things like not everything you see, even if it looks like somebody you recognize, doesn't necessarily mean it's real. Even if you're talking to someone that sounds like your coworker, it might not actually be them. That is, I think, the kind of the world we live in. But it's difficult, as we've talked about in the past. It's super difficult to put that into some kind of an actionable package because, like,
Yeah.
what are you going to do? Tell your employees don't trust anyone. Don't click on any
Yeah.
buttons.
This feels like such a platitude that it's just like, oh, just do more training. I really question the efficacy and the impact of that sort of thing. But that's
And I
another
know
rant for another day.
I've got several vendors lining up and this is not a joke, right? In my LinkedIn requests,
Mm-hmm.
offering to explain how they're offering kind of deconflict AI stuff for employees. So
Just
Yeah.
buy their service.
That's right. And I'm sure it's AI based. Conduct AI red teaming. This, by the way, is something that I had started before I left my last employer. Things as simple as like help desk chatbots can be a source of risk. I mean, even if it's just like, can you get your help desk chatbot to tell you how to make a bomb? On the one hand, it's not the same as exposing your information to to harm, but it can definitely be a reputational issue, and potentially it could be a legal issue too. I mean, like we've seen several times now where sales bots have effectively made deals to unreasonably good deals to website visitors, and the courts have ruled up to now, at least, that those deals are binding.
That's crazy. Maybe that's what happened with Broadcom and VMware. It's like the sales bots
Can
are
I
just
help you? The VMware sales box. Can I help you? I would like to buy VMware.
speaking of bombs. Maybe that's what Disney's been doing. Is they've been listening to chatbots, so all their new movies are bombs.
Oh, that could be.
Hmm.
It could be.
That was a long way to
Well,
go for that
look.
joke.
So look. It works for the Hallmark channel, right? Where AI is just writing script after script after script. It's the same thing time after time about the young lady moving out of the city to a small town and falling in love. I assume that because those work, Disney probably thought that it would work for them too.
Could be. I've
But
completely derailed our conversation.
that joke bombed just like
Yeah.
Disney's
Well,
movies.
we'll just cut this out of the show. It'll be fine.
So next is to implement holistic security, deploy systems like SASE, and of course, SASE. By the way, has been just this resounding success of a concept.
This feels like the vendor who's writing this particular article pitching their stuff. Let's just be.
Yeah, think so. Think so. Let's see, patch systems and software frequently, pretty self-evident. Improve attack readiness, so honing your incident response, and then adopt security frameworks like MITRE, Atlas, OWASP, etc. for AI application.
The one thing that I think about when I read a list like this, that's great, but with what staff and time? If I'm already buried under a bunch of other stuff, an executive reads this and comes to me and says, "Great, go do that." Like, okay, I've got to probably stop doing something else to do this. And what do I put down to pick this up? Is
So
what I always think
I
about.
I've I've talked with I've given several presentations recently at different community forums. And one of the most common questions I get asked is that very question. Like, how do you convince your leadership to go and invest in some new thing? Because it, like they want you to spend less money, not more. They're not looking for you to find new things to spend money on. They're
Right.
looking for you to find ways to save money. And this is kind of operating in that, against that. I've been reading this book that I think is perhaps the has the answer. I'm still kind of digesting it. While I'm talking, I'll find the name of that book. It is called The CISO Evolution, the name of the book. It's a very kind of blends business, finance, and economics with security. So it's really aimed at senior leaders in the security world to help them prioritize spending and be able to put it in context of other things that the business has to do. But one of the challenges is that even this book is, and while I think it gives some really great advice on how to position, your roadmap and how to position investments and whatnot, the challenge that I ran into, and I think that a lot of people run into, and this may be what you're alluding to as well, is how do you find the time to even build the business case? Because there are just so many things like this. There are so many things that you have to go and pay attention to and prioritize. And even if you have the answer on how to convince your organization to invest, in some kind of prioritized way, how do you find the time to build that prioritized list when it is changing so fast? And I don't have a good answer for that. That's a problem, and I think this is probably where relying on frameworks can help. And by the way, I don't love that answer.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's not even to a certain extent even beyond the concept of cash spend or budgetary spend, but also staff time spend. And that's something I sometimes struggle with some executives is that they don't necessarily always appreciate the care and feeding and ongoing run rate of product maintenance, various different methodologies or techniques that need staff time to stay up and running. I'm struggling on what I want to say here, but the programs and the projects that take place, you spin it up, they still need attention, they still need staff time to keep them going. And if you're still expecting that same sort of output from some program, you have to account for the staff time it takes to run that program and that project. And it feels like once you spin something up, you have to account for that ongoing care and feeding costs from a staff time. And it seems like that is lost often in these discussions.
Yeah, I so the thing that I used to do is describe it like, buying a house or buying a car. And okay, so we bought the thing. We bought the sim, right? And the sim cost $1 million or $100,000 or whatever. And that was like the cost of buying the car. But like, you have to put gas in it, and you have to get the oil changed, and you have to rotate the tires. You have to change out the windshield wiper blades, and you have to drive it. It isn't just the initial purchase. And so when I would make financial cases, it would include not just the purchase price, but also, an allocation of labor that was an ongoing commitment. And there's an expectation over time that you drive efficiency. And in the past, every company I've ever worked for is expected about a 10% improvement per year. In some instances, I think that's a bit unreasonable, but it is what it is. So yeah, I mean, you're right. I would like to think most senior leaders understand that concept, but I also think that sometimes vendors don't do us a good service when we go and buy these security offerings on explaining exactly how much goes into managing them, and then we're kind of stuck having to put a lot more resources into the care and feeding and operation of this thing that we just bought, which is important, right? Not saying that it wasn't. We didn't understand necessarily how much effort goes into it. So I think in my experience, like that's an area where I think we have to focus a lot, is making sure that we really clearly understand what it takes to manage it, and then also take that and very clearly represent that in the business case that we present to the business. Now, that doesn't account for the fact that most have amnesia, and at the turn of the year they kind of zero out that line item, and then you have to go
Yep,
back and remind them that no, the thing is still here, the people are still required, and that, as my dad would say, is why it's called work.
that's cheerful. No, I hear you. Anyway, I going down just a random path there, but so long story short, I think the takeaway I get from this is AI is going to get more powerful, and the state of what is possible is changing rapidly, and behooves all of us to stay on top of it.
Yeah, I'll also add that ransomware was a revolution in security. Prior to ransomware, we were able to take gambled bets. Like we could gamble on not being the subject of an attack, and it didn't include the occasional worm that we would have to deal with. It kind of hit everybody. But ransomware really changed the calculus on that, because like everybody is on the table now. They are going after everybody. It's the the target of opportunity, and certainly there's different threat actors that specialize in different industries and go after different specific entities. But as a whole, everybody is in the pot of potential victims right now, and so we're seeing companies victimized that you would never have thought would have been a victim, like flower shops and oil change places and whatnot. Like it's all up and down the economy right now, as we're seeing victims. And I see a potential for AI to drive another kind of revolution. I don't know exactly in what form that will take, but I think it's going to drive similar in a similar way that ransomware drove a whole new threat actor, class of threat actor. I think we're going to see AI drive yet another new class of threat actor into the market. What that looks like, I don't know, but my guess is we're just going to see a lot more attacks. We're going to have to do a lot more to make sure that our crap is patched, that we do a better job of prioritizing, that we aren't leaking secrets, and so on.
Well, I'm sure people will be selling us lots of blinky boxes to solve this problem too.
Yeah, with AI.
Just buy their blinky box. It'll be fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
We should sell. We should get in that business.
We will. We will. We're working on a deal, by the way, with a sponsor that will help protect your firewalls.